All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the most underrated topic in the bodybuilding community by far, in my opinion, and it's something that I wish I talked about sooner. And this is going to be how you can get so much more stimulus out of every single set you do and just build much more muscle overall. This isn't clickbait, this isn't misleading, this is genuinely going to be one of the most, if not the most important thing when it comes to your potential in bodybuilding. So we hear intensity talked about a lot. And with that whole discussion about intensity and RPEs or RIRs or just failure or intensity techniques, there just tends to be an entire lack of nuance on how the end of your set should actually look. And the problem with this is bodybuilding is a game of fighting your instincts. You are going to inevitably self-sabotage. And if you're not prepared for that, you're not going to make it very far, and your efforts are going to be wasted. I can speak firsthand from this. I've overcome it, and I figured out how the end of your sets should look and what you should be doing as you approach failure. So the set that I'm showing on the screen right now of my tricep pushdowns, you'll notice that if you were to film your typical set, and of course I can't just assume that everybody trains this way, but for the vast majority of people, this is the case. I've been a trainer my entire adult life since I graduated high school. I've been an online trainer training people that are looking to build as much muscle as possible for years at this point. This is the biggest mistake I see. It's not splits, it's not volume amount, technique's a big one, sure, but it's not all that kind of stuff. It's how the end of the set looks. So watch my final few reps here. I don't have a whole ton to say right at this very moment. Just watch these sets. Watch these final couple reps, I mean. Look at the control. And look at that final rep. Look at this one here. Nice and slow, extreme grinder. Controlled back up on the eccentric. And that's the set. Not even to failure. But that final rep in that set was harder than what I see the vast majority of people ever do on any sets in the gym. Typically what happens, and you'll see this in this specific set of machine pull downs here, is you'll have a dedicated range of motion from point A to point B. As you approach failure, what happens is once you get fatigued at a certain point, usually the short position, you kind of instinctively shorten your range of motion. And if you watch right now, my range of motion progressively shortens. But if you were to watch this exact clip back from the start of the set to the end of the set, you'll see that my reps never actually slowed down. I never even tried to grind through the tough part. And that set's from last year. I thought I was training incredibly hard in that set. The reality is I wasn't. I wasn't actively activating my high threshold motor units. The biggest muscle fibers in the large motor units aren't getting activated when you just beat around the bush and avoid those super grindy reps. And of course, last year, yeah, the majority of my training was good. I was pretty big. You could even see in that clip I'm pretty big. But there's no doubt I'm not getting as much as I could have out of that set. And there's no doubt that I wasn't getting as big as I possibly could due to that misunderstanding of failure. See, what I looked at failure as was when I was unable to get to 0 reps in reserve, or rather when I was unable to get to that final rep and complete that final rep, I was at 0 RIR and I would instantly go into partials. The issue with this way of thinking is I never actually failed. I just gave up and I didn't try and complete any more reps after I felt like I couldn't get more. My rep speed never slowed down. I never grinded enough to truly activate the largest motor units in that given muscle. And this applies to any set of any lift. I'm not telling you to voluntarily slow your reps down towards the end of your set, but you want to make sure that you are going nice and slow involuntarily. It has to be your muscles trying to activate as much as they possibly can in order to get the weight moving. And typically what happens is, I'll just cut ahead a little bit here. People use too much cheat and too much momentum to the point where they create an explosive movement off the bat, and as soon as they run out of that momentum, they actually have to activate some muscle fibers to really kick in and push for that final rep to actually complete from point A to point B. What happens is you just hit this crazy sticking point, and I challenge any of you who regularly film your sets to look at any of your sets that you take to quote-unquote failure and look at the final rep. You'll notice that the second to last rep, or the final completed rep, is pretty quick. It's pretty smooth. And then you'll notice that your failure rep is just kind of like a quick, almost like third, maybe half rep. You instantly hit a sticking point, and then the rep is over right there. You never actually activated those large motor units. You just tested them for a split second and then gave up. So, one, the solution to this is going to be to push harder, to try and push through that sticking point, because your perception of how difficult that sticking point is not going to be very accurate in the moment. There's going to be a lot of times where you hit that sticking point and it feels like you can't overcome it, and a lot of the time you actually can. It's just going much slower than you want it to. And that rep, surprise, is going to give you more growth than anything else you're doing in the gym. It's intensity. As long as you maintain good technique and you push that hard, that is what's going to get you to grow. The second thing I'd say here is this self-sabotage will hold you back, not just in terms of giving up before you truly fail. The self-sabotage is in the technique that we use. The first one I'm going to talk about here is how your technique breaks down, and more specifically, how you cheat. When you use extra momentum and excess cheat, and it's not in a productive way, what's really happening here is you're generating so much momentum at the start of the concentric that when that momentum starts to die down a little bit and you have to kind of finish off that rep, finish that concentric with the actual biggest muscle fibers in that given muscle, you don't have the strength to do it because you built up so much momentum that now that loss of momentum just smacks you like a brick wall. You just run into it, you can't do anything about it, and that's why your sets end early. So you'll notice, look at your failure reps on anything that you filmed. If you haven't filmed anything, please go to the gym, film a few sets to failure, and just notice on that failure rep, how often are you explosively doing that concentric, getting a third, maybe half the way up, and then you hit this brick wall sticking point and your set instantly ends, the weight instantly comes back down. The way to get around that is to use a controlled but highly forceful concentric. Look at this rep right here. That is exactly how you do it. That's spot on. And that set isn't even to failure. People would say, oh, you should be training all these movements to failure. And I actually think failure can be a distraction a lot of the time. So I'm usually a massive advocate of just training to 0 RIR. So what I would do in this case is just use a lot of control, but keep your force incredibly high. So maintain your technique, maintain your setup. External stability helps a ton with this, and that's why I'm a huge fan of it. It just allows for a higher force output. So the most important principle to understand to fully comprehend this exact training methodology is Henneman's size principle. And this, to summarize and to kind of paraphrase what this principle is, it is your body wanting to recruit the least amount of muscle fibers possible to get the task done, and that is how your body preserves energy. The more challenging the task, especially in short-term, high-force output tasks like lifting weights, the closer you get to failure, the more muscle fibers activate and the bigger muscle fibers start to activate as you get to failure. So that is where you're getting the majority of your growth. And if you are not actually getting these slow, grindy reps, forcing your body to recruit the highest threshold motor units possible, then you're not actually getting that much out of that set. So if your set looks along the lines of what I was doing on the machine pull down earlier, where it's like you're getting quick full reps, and then as soon as it starts to get a little bit tough in the short position, you don't actually grind. You just go into a 90% ROM rep, and then when that gets hard, you go into an 80% ROM rep, but none of it's actually a fight. It's just quick reps, and then when they start getting hard, then the reps just shrink and you go into partials. A lot of people would see that set and say, yeah, that looks pretty tough. You're going well beyond failure, and I'd actually argue it's not that tough. And even if you just take a step back, forget about all the noise, and just think about how you felt during and after that set. Did that feel as hard as you think it should when you're describing going multiple partial reps beyond failure? Probably not. A lot of people that just train to 0 or 1 rep in reserve, that is much harder than the people that just end their set early and go directly into partials. So it's an important thing that you need to be aware of if you actually want to go far in bodybuilding. So let's talk a little bit about just overall misjudging failure. A lot of people misjudge failure just because the sticking point feels like it's something you can't quite overcome. It hits too quick, it's too intense, you don't think you can do it. Half the time, I'd say, yeah, this is totally valid. There's just a sticking point that's genuinely too hard to overcome. That is a legit thing. That's just called failure. A lot of the time, you are also going to hit a sticking point that you can overcome, but it just feels like it hits you too quick and you're unable to overcome it. But that's just an issue with your perception. So what I would say here, to confirm that you are at failure, what I would do is fight that rep for as much as you can. So what I'd say here is, in a practical way, fight for a full 2 seconds. And I like to do the 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, because time goes by very slow when you are lifting weights. So basically, count for a couple seconds, fight that rep as hard as you possibly can, and give it an honest effort. If the weight doesn't budge at all, or it starts to come back down, that's the end of your set. You're good. You confirmed you're at failure. You can call it there, and that is totally fine. That's exactly what you're aiming for. But if you find that sticking point, you just instantly give up and you don't even give an honest fight to it, you might have had another rep in the tank. And maybe sometimes it's 2 reps in the tank. And when you're not actually... This is where the nuance comes in with RIR, because people look at it in a very black and white way. Like, okay, well, what's the big deal if I'm at 1 RIR? It probably grows you just the same, maybe 95% as much. So why is it even that big of a deal? Well, I'd say even if that was 1 RIR or 2 RIR, or however you want to quantify it, depending on the set you're doing, if you're not actually getting the difficult part of that rep done, you're not getting the stimulus out of it. So if you're just a kind of like easily attempting like the first third of the rep, the weight flies up just because you're using some momentum, and then you never actually grind, you just give up as soon as you hit the sticking point, you're not getting that stimulus from that rep. It's the grind that gives you growth. That's what activates the large muscle fibers, and that's how you actually get growing. So that is incredibly important for growth. So just be aware that your perception is faulty. You are actively fighting against your instincts. And this isn't something that is just kind of like, oh yeah, I'll just keep that in mind when I'm lifting. Like, that has to be something that you are constantly aware of every set, in this session, your next session, and for the years of training that you have ahead. Like, it doesn't get easier. It can become a habit, but it's always going to be very difficult. The next one is going to be self-sabotaging with a lack of control. What happens here is just using too much momentum. I'm not even against using some momentum in your lifting, as long as you know how to do it properly and you can kind of use it in a productive way. But a lot of the time what happens here is people think they can use momentum just for the sake of getting an extra rep. And it's not being able to go from rep 6 to rep 7 and just being able to log 7 that gives you growth. It's making that rep 7 extremely difficult, or making that 6th rep or that attempt at the 7th rep an actual honest effort. Whether you get it or not is somewhat arbitrary depending on the range of motion you go through. But when we're talking about lack of control, I'm talking about using too much cheat and momentum and just doing whatever it takes to get that rep up. You'll notice that during these cheat reps, you're not actually grinding all that much. You're just adjusting your technique and adjusting the amount of momentum you use to confirm that you can get this rep. So I see this all the time with pull-ups. This is definitely the most common instance I see it on, where people are more focused on just being able to get the next reps for the sake of logging it in their logbook than they are to actually grind and give stimulus to the lats. So instead of focusing on just cheating enough to get your chin over the bar to get to whatever arbitrary range of motion standard you want to hit, you want to focus on grinding the final rep. It doesn't matter if you get all the way up or not, because if you're getting good stimulus, you're building enough muscle to where you're going to be able to add a rep next time, or in 2 weeks, or in 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, depending on your training age. It's about the grind, it's about the effort, and it's about activating as many muscle fibers as you can, especially the big ones at the end of the set, in that set. That is what it's all about. So if you have to compensate by breaking down your technique or using some momentum just to get that next rep, you're actually sacrificing intensity, you're sacrificing stimulus just to get a higher rep count, and that doesn't actually mean anything. It's no longer a good metric when it's at the expense of the stimulus you're getting from your set. So passively track your exercises and train with the highest intensity you possibly can. The next one here is going to be partials. I'm going to touch on this one again just to kind of summarize what I discussed earlier in the video. A lot of the time, and when I say a lot of the time, I literally mean a lot of the time, partials just don't work. You'll find that when you push a set to actual true RIR, you have nothing left to give. Like, if you actually get a 3 to 7 second concentric on your final set of, say, Smith bench, good luck doing any partials after that. It's not happening. Same with preacher curls. People always ask, why don't I do partials or anything like that? It's like, you just can't. When you have a legit grinder at the end of the set and your muscles absolutely cooked, there's nothing left to give. And when you're able to do partials in multiple of them on every lift and you don't feel like you're beat up all the time, it's just a sign that you're not giving the actual full reps as much love and attention as they need to give you that growth that you want to get out of the set. So forget about partials. To me, they're just a distraction. There are kind of niche cases where I find them useful, like any short biased lift. I find lengthened partials kind of useful, but for the most part, I would just advise against doing a whole ton of short bias lifts for the most part. So if you have a handful in your program, yeah, some partials there as long as they're max effort, totally fine. But that is kind of the exception, not the rule, I would say. So when it comes to partials, don't view them as you training beyond failure, because that's the vast majority of the time just simply not what it is. So partials, they have their time and place, I guess. I'm not a huge fan of them. Usually they're just kind of like a scapegoat for saying that you could train to failure, or saying that you did train to failure so you feel good about yourself, but you didn't actually get that much out of it. So I think I got my point across here. I'll move on to the next one. Next intensity technique that will hold you back in a lot of cases is kind of like a sneaky rest pause. This is similar to partials, where not in like a technical sense, like obviously you're doing full reps instead of partial reps, it's pretty black and white there, but in the same way that a partial after failure can be, or quote unquote after failure, can kind of be this insidious thing that kind of sabotages your sets. Rest pause kind of does the same thing. As you get close to failure and as your reps start to get tough, what happens is you will rest at the top just so you can get more reps. And just from a muscle fiber recruitment standpoint, multiple or just more kind of challenging reps is not going to be more productive than just one or two extremely tough, grindy, potent reps. So when you're doing your sets, and there are unique instances where you do want to use a little bit of pause, like I'd say taking a brief pause towards the end of a set of a squat pattern is totally fine if you want to reset your brace or just catch your breath, especially if you're doing higher reps. But again, exception, not the rule. Rest pause doesn't let you get those super grindy reps in a lot of the time. And I'm not talking about intentionally implementing rest pause as an intensity technique. I'm talking about just resting between reps during your straight set before the reps get hard at the end of the set. This is going to hold you back because, yes, one, you will be able to get more reps. You will be able to see progressive overload, quote unquote, in your program. And that feels good in the short term, but it will lead to less stimulus, especially in the long run. So chase those grindy reps. If I could leave you with one quote, chase the grindy reps. Last thing I want to touch on in this video, technique breakdown. You do not want your technique to break down too soon. You'll see this happen all the time, especially on something like, let's say, a lateral raise, where instead of just staying strict and trying to grind through that, your back arches a ton, your scaps retract a ton, and you basically just turn it into like this weird kind of like shrug / like Y raise variation, and you're just hiding the side delts from actually grinding. And again, if you film that set, you're gonna see you're not actually getting any slow grindy reps where you're really activating those high threshold motor units. You can say the same thing especially about pull-ups or squat patterns. When you're doing a set of pull-ups and you're pulling up, you're trying to target your lats, say you're doing a neutral grip and you're keeping a neutral spine, you're keeping your rib cage down a bit, and you're just trying to pack down and depress your shoulders as you pull. And then right before the reps get hard, your back starts to round, your feet swing forwards, your chest and your rib cage, your sternum, they all cave in. Your scaps and your shoulders rise up. Your scaps go into like an upward rotation, and you're just basically activating your traps and some elbow flexors at that point. You're not getting those difficult reps in for the lats. So stop focusing on getting those final reps as quickly as you can, or just guaranteeing that you even can get them. It's not about how quick you get the rep. If anything, you want the reps to be slower involuntarily. It's not about if you're even able to get the rep. It's about how hard did you push? What is the amount of intensity that you brought to the set? how many muscle fibers did you activate? Because that's literally what's going to drive growth. And ultimately, you can say, well, isn't it better if I just focus on progressive overload and add a rep even if my technique breaks down a little bit? And while I'd say a little bit of technique breakdown is totally fine, because it's just impossible to avoid it entirely, but I would say when it comes to progressive overload, you'll get better progression from taking that brief step back and making your sets harder intentionally than you would to try and cheat, because you're getting more stimulus, you're building more muscle. And if you do that session over session over session over session, I think the person that's getting more stimulus is going to get better growth, which will result in better progression in the long term than the person that's just trying to sacrifice that long-term stimulus to scratch that itch of getting a short-term +1 by speeding up the final reps through technique breakdown, or using more cheat than they need to, or quickly going into partials, or using this weird kind of like rest pause variation. So that's pretty much all I got for the video. If you have any thoughts or anything on this, please let me know in the comments, but I think it's incredibly important. I'm not exaggerating when I say it's one of the most important videos I've made, or one of the most underrated topics, or one of the most important topics. And yeah, with that said, curious to hear your thoughts. I will see you guys in the next one.